Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really plunging into one of the brain's most fascinating yet maybe less talked about structures, the thalamus.
That's right.
Think of it as your brain's central command center, maybe. And our mission, our goal today, is to really unlock its core functions, map out its intricate landscape, and reveal its surprising impact on everything, from emotions to pain.
Mhm.
We're aiming to go beyond the basics here, diving as deep as we possibly can, so you can truly master this incredible piece of neurology, like the elite professionals really do.
Exactly. And the thalamus, it's profoundly complex. It lies right there in the center of so many crucial neuronal loops, throughout your entire nervous system.
Yeah.
It's not just a simple relay station, it's a central processor.
Mm.
Understanding it isn't just memorizing facts, it's absolutely crucial for appreciating the fundamental processes behind how your brain takes in, integrates, and ultimately processes, well, pretty much everything.
Okay. Let's unpack this then. If we're really aiming for mastery, what is the thalamus fundamentally? And why is it so incredibly important? Where does it even live in this, vast neurological landscape?
Right. So at its foundation, the thalamus acts as a critical relay and integrative station.
Mm.
Think of it maybe as the grand central station for information heading to all areas of the cerebral cortex.
That's the outer layer, right, for higher thought.
Exactly. And also to the basal ganglia, the hypothalamus, and even the brainstem. Anatomically, it's positioned right at the rostral end. That's the top end of the brainstem, a really prime location for controlling information flow.
And when you picture it, it's a relatively large, sort of egg-shaped mass of gray matter.
Yep, egg-shaped is a good description.
And it forms the major part of the diencephalon, that core brain region.
Mm.
And importantly, you actually have two thalamies, right? One on each side of the third ventricle.
Precisely, two of them.
So like two highly sophisticated control hubs, almost mirrors, flanking that central pathway.
Exactly. And to zoom in a bit more on its geography, the anterior end, the front, it narrows and rounds off. It actually forms the back boundary of the interventricular foramen. That's a key opening for fluid.
Okay.
Then at the posterior end, the back, it expands quite a bit to form what we call the pulvinar. And this pulvinar sort of subtly overhangs the superior colliculus, which is involved in visual reflexes.
Right. I remember that.
Its inferior surface, the bottom, is continuous with the tegmentum of the midbrain. And then the medial surface, the one facing inwards, forms part of the lateral wall of the third ventricle. And this is usually where it connects to the opposite thalamus.
Oh, there's a connection between the two.
Yeah, usually, by a bridge of gray matter. It's called the interthalamic connection, or sometimes the interthalamic adhesion.
So it's really nestled in there, tightly connected. Does it have any protective layers or specific coverings we should know about?
It does, yeah. The top surface, the superior surface, is covered by a thin layer of white matter called the stratum zonale. And on the lateral surface, the outside, there's another white matter layer, the external medullary lamina.
Okay.
And these aren't just, wrapping paper. They're integral to its structure and how signals move around it.
And what about inside, the internal architecture? Is it just one solid block of gray matter, or is it organized in a more, clever way?
That's where it gets really interesting. Inside, the gray matter is anything but uniform. It's cleverly divided by this vertical Y-shaped sheet of white matter. We call that the internal medullary lamina.
A Y shape inside.
Exactly, a Y shape. And this Y effectively carves the thalamus into three main parts. You've got the anterior part nestled between the arms of the Y,
Oh, okay.
and then the medial and lateral parts, which are on the sides of the stem of the Y.
Right, I can picture that.
And it's also worth noting there are smaller groups of nuclei, little cell clusters, actually tucked within that internal medullary lamina itself. And some others are dotted along the medial and lateral surfaces too. So this intricate internal division really speaks volumes about its diverse jobs.
Okay, now that we have the lay of the land, let's really dive into these subdivisions. This is where we start seeing how this egg-shaped structure orchestrates so much. Let's break down each part, focusing on the major nuclei, their connections, and what they actually do.
Sounds good.
And even if, you're not a clinician meeting every detail instantly, truly understanding these major players and their roles, that's absolutely key for the kind of mastery we're aiming for today.
Right. Let's start with the anterior part. This contains the anterior thalamic nuclei. Now, these nuclei receive a really crucial input, the mammillothalamic tract.
Mammillothalamic, okay.
Yeah, it comes from the mammillary nuclei, which are part of the hypothalamus and important for memory. They also have reciprocal two-way connections with the cingulate gyrus involved in emotion, and the hypothalamus itself.
So, okay, if these anterior nuclei are tied into the limbic system, our emotional center, and also recent memory, what does that mean functionally? Is it about linking feelings to memories?
That's a great way to put it. Its function is considered closely associated with the limbic system. It seems concerned with emotional tone and also the mechanisms of recent memory.
Emotional tone. So the feeling associated with an event.
Exactly. How you feel about a recent memory, not just the facts of it. They're kind of like the emotional taggers for your recent experiences.
Yeah.
Damage here could potentially affect that link.
Fascinating. Okay, from that emotional hub, let's move inwards to the medial part. This area is dominated by the large dorsomedial nucleus plus some smaller ones. Sounds like a big connector.
It absolutely is. The dorsomedial nucleus is a real central hub. It has two-way connections with the entire prefrontal cortex of the frontal lobe.
The whole prefrontal cortex. Wow.
Yeah, the whole thing. That's your executive function, center decision-making, personality planning, and it also connects to hypothalamic nuclei. What's more, it's interconnected with all other groups of thalamic nuclei. Its reach is incredibly broad.
So with connections that wide, its function must be pretty encompassing then, not just one specific thing.
Precisely. Think of the medial thalamus, especially that dorsomedial nucleus, as integrating a huge variety of sensory information. We're talking somatic, visceral, even olfactory input.
Olfactory too. I thought smell bypassed the thalamus usually.
Well, the primary olfactory pathway is different, but information related to smell does get integrated here. And the key thing is relating all this sensory information to your emotional feelings and subjective states.
Ah, so it's not just processing the data, it's blending it with how you feel, your internal state.
Exactly. This is how you come to truly feel the world around you, not just perceive it objectively. It shapes your subjective reality.
Okay, that's huge. Now the lateral part, you said it's divided further.
That's right. The lateral part is split into two main sections, or tiers, a dorsal tier and a ventral tier, each with its own set of important nuclei.
Okay, let's take the dorsal tier first. It has names like the lateral dorsal nucleus, lateral posterior, and the pulvinar. You mentioned the pulvinar earlier. What do we know about these? Are their connections clear?
Well, the specifics of their connections aren't entirely clear yet, to be honest. But we know they have extensive interconnections with other thalamic nuclei, and also with key cortical areas, the parietal lobe, the cingulate gyrus, and the occipital and temporal lobes too.
So maybe less direct sensory relay, more integration?
That seems to be the idea. They're likely involved in higher order processing, maybe integrating complex sensory information that's already been processed a bit elsewhere. Things like spatial awareness, attention, integrating visual and other sensory inputs perhaps. The pulvinar, being the largest nucleus, is particularly implicated in visual attention and processing.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, onto the ventral tier of that lateral part. You said it's a sequence of nuclei.
Yes, arranged roughly front to back, craniocaudal. First up is the ventral anterior nucleus, or VA. This one is heavily connected to structures involved in movement control.
That's why.
Things like the reticular formation, which regulates arousal and motor functions, the substantia nigra, crucial for dopamine and motor control, the corpus striatum, part of the basal ganglia for motor planning, and the premotor cortex.
So it's right in the motor loop pathway.
Exactly. It sits on the pathway between the corpus striatum and the frontal cortex motor areas. So it plays a significant role in influencing the activities of the motor cortex, maybe coordinating planning signals.
Gotcha. And next in line.
Next is the ventral lateral nucleus, or VL. It shares many connections with the VA, but the big difference here is that the VL receives a major, very important input directly from the cerebellum.
Ah, the cerebellum, balance and coordination central.
Precisely. It also gets a minor input from the red nucleus, another motor structure. Its main projections then go out to the motor and premotor regions of the cerebral cortex.
So this one is really directly influencing motor commands then, because of that cerebellar link.
That's the key takeaway. The VL is a primary influencer of your motor activity, especially for fine-tuning and coordinating movements, thanks to that massive cerebellar input.
Okay, VA and VL handling motor influences. What's the last one in the ventral tier?
That would be the ventral posterior nucleus, or VP, and this one is crucially subdivided based on the sensory information it handles. It's the main sensory relay station for the body and face.
Subdivided how?
You have the ventral posteromedial nucleus, the VPM. Think M for medial, M for mouth, which receives the ascending trigeminal pathway, carrying sensation from your face, and also the gustatory pathways, carrying taste information.
Face and taste go to VPM.
Okay.
And the other part?
That's the ventral posterolateral nucleus, the VPL. Think L for lateral, L for limbs and trunk. The VPL receives those really important ascending sensory tracts for all the rest of your body. The medial lemniscus.
That's touch, pressure, vibration, proprioception, right? Knowing where your limbs are.
Exactly. And also the spinothalamic tracts, which carry pain and temperature signals.
Wow. Okay. So VPM for the face, VPL for the body. These sound incredibly important. How do we actually feel things then? Where does this info go next?
Right. This is critical. All that raw sensory data from both VPM and VPL gets bundled up and sent out via thalamocortical projections. These nerve fibers travel through a dense pathway called the posterior limb of the internal capsule, then fan out in the corona radiata,
Heading towards the cortex.
directly to the primary somatic sensory areas of the cerebral cortex. These are located very specifically in the post-central gyrus of the parietal lobe Brodmann areas 3, 1, and 2. That's your main sensory receiving area.
So VPM and VPL are the gatekeepers. They collect the signals and then project them precisely to the part of your brain map that represents that specific body part or facial area.
You've got it. They're absolutely essential for relaying common sensations, touch, pain, temperature, position, up to your conscious awareness.
Yeah.
Without them, that information doesn't reach the cortex for interpretation.
Incredible. Okay, so those are the main anterior, medial, and lateral divisions. But you mentioned some other nuclei too.
Yes, there are a few others that play really vital roles, sometimes more subtle ones. First, the intralaminar nuclei. These are small collections of nerve cells actually found within that Y-shaped internal medullary lamina.
Inside the Y. Oh.
Yeah. They receive input fibers from the reticular formation, remember, that's involved in arousal and sleep, and also from the spinothalamic and trigeminothalamic tracts, so they get pain and temperature info too.
And where do they send signals?
They send efferent fibers out to other thalamic nuclei, which then project onto the cortex and also directly to the corpus striatum.
So what's their main job thought to be?
Crucially, they are believed to profoundly influence your levels of consciousness and alertness. Given their input from the reticular formation, they seem to help set the overall wakefulness level of the brain, kind of like a dimmer switch for cortical activity.
Consciousness and alertness.
Wow.
Wow. Okay, what else?
Then you have the midline nuclei. These are groups of nerve cells right next to the third ventricle and also within that interthalamic connection, the bridge between the two thalami.
And their connections.
They also receive afferent fibers from the reticular formation. But honestly, their precise functions are still largely unknown.
Really? Still mysteries right in the middle of the brain.
Absolutely. It highlights how much we're still learning. We know they're there, we know some inputs, but the exact role still being worked out.
Okay, and the last one.
The reticular nucleus. Now, this one's interesting structurally. In a very thin layer of nerve cells that forms a sort of shell around the lateral aspect of the thalamus, sandwiched between the external medullary lamina and the posterior limb of the internal capsule.
A shell around the outside.
Kind of, yeah. And it receives inputs from both the cerebral cortex and the reticular formation. But here's the twist. Its output fibers go mainly back to other thalamic nuclei.
Ah, so it doesn't project out to the cortex itself. It talks back to the rest of the thalamus.
Mostly, yes. Its function isn't fully nailed down, but the thinking is that it acts as a critical modulator, maybe a kind of gatekeeper for thalamic activity. It might be involved in how the cerebral cortex regulates the thalamus, perhaps filtering or prioritizing information passing through, tuning its sensitivity.
Like the cortex telling the thalamus, pay more attention to this, or tone that down.
That's a plausible way to think about it, yeah. Regulating the flow.
Okay, so we've covered the main regional nuclei and these other important players, but you also mentioned two specific sensory relay giants earlier, the geniculate bodies.
Yes, the medial geniculate body, MGB, and the lateral geniculate body, LGB. These are highly specialized. The MGB is a key part of your auditory pathway. You can actually see it as a swelling on the posterior surface of the thalamus, just underneath the pulvinar.
And where does it get its input?
It receives auditory fibers via the inferior brachium, which comes directly from the inferior colliculus in the midbrain. The inferior colliculus is a major auditory processing center itself.
Does it get info from both ears?
Yes. Crucially, the MGB receives auditory information from both ears, although there's a predominance from the contralateral, the opposite ear. Its output fibers then form the auditory radiation, straight to the primary auditory cortex in the superior temporal gyrus. That's where you consciously perceive and interpret sound. MGB is your gateway to hearing.
Okay. MGB for auditory. What about the LGB?
The lateral geniculate body is the visual counterpart, an absolutely integral part of the visual pathway. It's another swelling, this time on the undersurface of the pulvinar.
And it's structured differently, you said. Layers.
Yes, remarkably so. It consists of 6 distinct layers of nerve cells, and it's the main termination point for almost all the fibers coming from your eyes via the optic tract, except for a few that go to the protectal nucleus for pupillary reflexes and such.
Where does the input come from specifically? The retina.
Exactly. The afferent fibers are the axons of the ganglion cells from your retina. Now, the wiring here is incredibly precise. Each LGB receives input from the temporal half of the retina of the ipsilateral eye, the same side, and from the nasal half of the retina of the contralateral eye, the opposite side. Those nasal fibers cross over at the optic chiasm.
Okay, that crossing is key. What does that mean for what each LGB sees?
It means that each lateral geniculate body processes visual information exclusively from the opposite visual field. Your left LGB sees the right side of the world, and your right LGB sees the left side.
Wow, that's elegantly organized.
It really is. And from those 6 layers in the LGB, the efferent fibers then form the visual radiation, which projects directly to the primary visual cortex in the occipital lobe. That's where those signals are turned into the images you consciously see.
MGB for hearing, LGB for seeing, absolutely fundamental relays.
Couldn't function without them.
Okay, so we've gone through the different parts, the nuclei, their specific roles. Now, to really cement this mastery, let's talk about the overarching key thalamic connections and functional principles. What are the big picture rules we need to grasp?
Right, there are a couple of really important concepts. First, we need to appreciate the reciprocal nature of thalamocortical connections. It's not just a one-way street from thalamus to cortex.
You mentioned this earlier. Can you elaborate?
Sure. Every single thalamic nucleus, well, with the exception of that reticular nucleus we just discussed, sends axons to specific parts of the cerebral cortex. But critically, every part of the cortex sends reciprocal fibers back to the thalamic nuclei it receives from.
So it's a constant conversation, a loop.
Exactly, a cortex-thalamus reciprocal loop. This means information is always being shared, processed, and refined. The cortex and thalamus are constantly modifying and fine-tuning each other's activities. It's a dynamic partnership.
Okay, that's principle 1, the constant feedback loop. What's second?
Second, the thalamus is a critical relay station in at least 2 essential sensory-motor axonal loops that are fundamental for normal, smooth, voluntary movement.
More loops. Which ones are these?
These are incredibly important pathways. One is the cerebellar rubrothalamic cortical pontocerebellar loop. That involves the cerebellum red nucleus, thalamus, specifically VL cortex, and pons feeding back to the cerebellum.
Okay, connecting cerebellum and cortex via the thalamus.
Right. And the other major one is the corticostriatal palatal thalamic cortical loop. This involves the cortex, basal ganglia, striatum and pallidum, and the thalamus, VAVL nuclei, feeding back to the cortex.
The basal ganglia loop, also crucial for movement.
Absolutely. These loops are the unsung heroes allowing for smooth, coordinated, planned movements. The thalamus is the essential go-between in both. Without its relay function here, our movements would likely be jerky, uncoordinated, and poorly planned.
Okay, so let's try and summarize the absolute core principles then, the things you absolutely need to know for that deep understanding. First, it's structure.
Right. Principle 1. It's not just a simple relay. It's a complicated collection of centrally placed, highly interconnected nerve cell groups, or nuclei. Its internal structure, that Y-shaped lamina, reflects its functional organization.
Okay. Principle 2. Sensory convergence.
Yes, a vast amount of all types of sensory information converges on the thalamus. Think touch, pain, temperature, position sense, hearing, vision, taste, the big exception being the primary pathway for smell.
Which gets integrated differently, maybe involving the thalamus later via other structures like the amygdala and hippocampus.
Exactly. But for most senses, the thalamus is where it all comes together, gets integrated through those internuclear connections, and then distributed onwards.
Okay. Principle 3, the thalamus-cortex link. You made a distinction about crude versus interpreted sensation.
This is vital. The thalamus and cerebral cortex are anatomically and functionally inseparable, really. The thalamus itself can appreciate crude sensations. Even if your sensory cortex is damaged, you might still feel that something is hot or painful, just generically.
But you wouldn't know what it is exactly.
Right. You need the cerebral cortex for the interpretation of sensations, recognizing its shape, its weight, its exact temperature, its texture. The thalamus provides the raw awareness. The cortex provides the detailed understanding and context.
Okay. Principle 4. Knowing those key relay nuclei is non-negotiable.
Absolutely. You have to know the specific connections and functions of the VPM and VPL for face and body sensation, and the medial and lateral geniculate bodies for hearing and vision. They are the direct gateways for sensory input to the cortex.
Principle 5, the motor role.
Yes, the ventral anterior VA and ventrolateral VL nuclei are crucial parts of those basal ganglion cerebellar circuits we mentioned. They're deeply involved in planning and executing voluntary movements, receiving input from structures like the globus pallidus and cerebellum, and projecting to motor planning areas in the frontal cortex.
Okay. Principle 6, the dorsomedial nucleus.
That large dorsomedial nucleus, with its massive two-way connections with the entire prefrontal cortex and the hypothalamus. This strongly suggests its role isn't just sensory integration, but linking that integration to subjective feeling states, mood, and even personality.
Affecting how you experience the world emotionally.
Precisely. And finally, principle 7, those intralaminar nuclei. Their close connection with the reticular formation means they're strategically positioned to control the overall activity level of the cerebral cortex. They're key players in consciousness and alertness.
Wow. Okay, that really pulls it all together. Now, having established how central and complex it is, let's shift to the clinical problems. What happens when things go wrong in this crucial hub?
Well, because it is such a central relay and integration point, disease affecting the thalamus can have really profound and often widespread effects.
What usually causes thalamic lesions?
Several things. It could be invaded by a neoplasm, a tumor. It can degenerate due to problems with its arterial blood supply, things like thrombosis, a clot, or hemorrhage, bleeding. Stroke is a common cause.
And because it's so central, does it often affect nearby structures too?
That's a really important point. Yes. Lesions often affect neighboring structures, and sometimes the symptoms from those adjacent areas can actually overshadow the primary thalamic problem.
For example?
Well, a vascular lesion might extend into the midbrain, potentially causing coma, or if it extends laterally into the internal capsule, you could see extensive motor and sensory deficits on the opposite side of the body because those crucial fibers run right past the thalamus.
Okay, so what are some direct consequences of damaging specific thalamic nuclei? Let's start with sensation.
Right. If you damage the ventral posteromedial, VPM, and ventral posterolateral, VPL nuclei, typically through thrombosis or hemorrhage of the arteries supplying them, the result is sensory loss.
Complete loss.
Loss of all forms of sensation. Light touch, tactile localization, knowing where things are touching you, discriminating between 2 points, muscle and joint sense. All gone. And crucially, this loss occurs on the opposite side of the body from the thalamic lesion.
Opposite side. Okay. That makes sense given the pathways. Now, this leads us to something you mentioned earlier, a really difficult condition. Thalamic pain, also called Dejerine-Roussy syndrome.
Yes, or sometimes analgesia dolorosa. It's a truly paradoxical and often agonizing condition.
Can you remind us of that case study? The 61-year-old man?
Yeah, it's a powerful illustration. So this man has hypertension, suffers a stroke. Initially, he has complete sensory loss on the right side, numbness.
Okay.
But then, 3 days later, something bizarre happens. He starts experiencing excruciating burning pain from even the lightest touch on that same right leg. A pinprick, warmth, cold, all agonizing. And the pain lingers long after the stimulus stops.
Even though his sensation was initially lost.
Exactly. And what's even stranger is that his actual threshold for feeling pain might be raised. It takes a stronger stimulus to trigger the pain, and there's often a delay before it starts. But once it starts, it's severe, spontaneous, and feels like it's right on the skin.
That sounds horrific. And the diagnosis there?
That's classic Dejerine-Roussy syndrome, involving, in his case, the left thalamus, causing symptoms on the right side. It's thought to be a kind of thalamic overreaction, most often caused by an infarction, a blockage of blood flow, affecting the lateral nuclei, usually due to hypertensive vascular disease or thrombosis.
And you said it's hard to treat.
Extremely difficult.
Yeah.
This spontaneous excessive pain occurs on the opposite side of the body and often just doesn't respond well, even to powerful opioid painkillers. The brain seems to be generating this aberrant pain signal itself.
Wow. Okay, so that's a devastating consequence. But on the flip side, is there a situation where intentionally lesioning part of the thalamus can actually relieve pain?
Surprisingly, yes. For patients suffering from truly severe intractable pain, often associated with terminal cancer, a neurosurgical procedure involving cauterization, basically destroying, the intralaminar nuclei has shown some success.
The intralaminar nuclei, the ones involved in alertness and consciousness.
Exactly. Since they receive pain signals via the spinothalamic tract and are involved in relaying aspects of pain perception and effect to the cortex, selectively lesioning them can sometimes disrupt that pathway and provide significant relief from otherwise untreatable pain.
Fascinating application. What about movement problems? Can thalamic lesions cause those?
They can. Abnormal involuntary movements are sometimes seen after vascular lesions of the thalamus. Specifically, you might see choreothetosis, that's a combination of jerky, dance-like movements, chordia, and slower writhing movements, ethetosis. Often this comes with ataxia, a lack of coordination.
Is that definitely due to the thalamus itself?
Well, that's the question. It's sometimes uncertain if it's solely due to the thalamic dysfunction or if it also involves damage to neighboring motor structures like the caudate nucleus or the lentiform nucleus, parts of the basal ganglia. The ataxia, the coordination problem, might also stem partly from the loss of proprioception, that muscle and joint sense, due to the thalamic lesion itself. If you don't know where your limbs are, it's hard to coordinate them.
Makes sense. And you mentioned a specific posture too, the thalamic hand.
Yes, that's quite characteristic, though not always present. The contralateral hand, the one opposite the lesion, is held in a specific abnormal posture.
What does it look like?
The wrist is usually pronated, turned palm downwards or inwards, and flexed. The metacarpophalangeal joints, the main knuckles at the base of the fingers, are also flexed, but the interphalangeal joints, the joints further out in the fingers, are extended.
So kind of like a flexed wrist and main knuckles, but with stiffly extended fingers.
That's a good description. The fingers can often still be moved actively, but the movements tend to be slow. This posture is thought to result from altered muscle tone due to the disruption of thalamic pathways involved in motor control.
Okay, lots of potential clinical signs there. Let's tie this all together with that complex clinical problem-solving example you had. The 45-year-old man. Can you run through his symptoms again?
Sure. This man suddenly developed weakness in his left leg. On examination, paralysis of the left leg, weakness in the left arm, increased muscle tone, spasticity, and exaggerated reflexes, all on the left side. He also had significant loss of both superficial sensation, touch, pain, temp, and deep sensation, proprioception, on that entire left side.
Okay, sensory and motor deficits on the left. What else?
During the exam, he showed spontaneous jerking movements in his left leg, and when asked to do the finger-to-nose test with his left arm, he displayed a marked intention tremor. The shaking got worse as he approached his nose. Then 3 days later, he developed that agonizing, spontaneous, or easily triggered pain down his left leg.
Right. A really complex picture. So, putting on our mastery hats, how do we explain all of this based on a thalamic issue?
Okay, the diagnosis here pointed to a thrombosis, a clot, specifically in the thalamo-geniculate branch of the right posterior cerebral artery. This artery supplies parts of the thalamus. The clot caused a degenerative lesion, basically tissue damage, within the right thalamus.
Right thalamus causing left-sided symptoms. Makes sense. Break it down symptom by symptom.
Let's do it. The sensory impairment on his left side, that was a direct result of the damage to the sensory relay nuclei, PPL-VPM, within the right thalamus. Clear cut.
Okay. What about the motor weakness, the hemiparesis?
The left leg arm weakness, the increased tone, the exaggerated reflexes. That wasn't directly caused by the thalamic damage itself. It was caused by edema swelling in the nearby posterior limb of the right internal capsule.
Ah, the neighboring structure effect. The internal capsule carries the main motor pathways, the corticospinal tract.
Exactly. The swelling compressed those fibers, causing the temporary paralysis and spasticity. That's why his motor function improved later as the edema resolved. It wasn't permanent thalamic damage causing that specific weakness pattern.
Got it. What about the involuntary movements and tremor?
The choreolotetoid movements in his left leg and the intention tremor in his left arm were likely due to damage either to the right thalamus itself, perhaps affecting VAVL or connections, or possibly damage to the right, dead to the thalamic fibers, that cerebral pathway we talked about heading to the thalamus. Damage there can cause tremor.
And finally, that awful pain.
The agonizing pain down his left leg developing later. That was a direct result of the lesion within the right thalamus, a classic presentation of thalamic pain, or Dejerine-Roussy syndrome, developing after the initial sensory loss.
Wow. So that one vascular event hitting the thalamus and causing some local swelling explains that whole constellation of sensory, motor, movement, and pain symptoms on the opposite side.
Precisely. It perfectly illustrates the central role of the thalamus and how interconnected everything is in that region. A single lesion can have such diverse and profound effects.
What an incredible journey through Well, arguably one of the brain's most absolutely central and powerful structures. It really does earn that title, the master relay and integration station. The complexity, the connections, the effects when things go wrong. It just underscores how vital it is. We've definitely taken a deep dive aiming for that mastery.
Absolutely. And I think understanding the thalamus, it's really not just about memorizing the names of the nuclei, is it? It's about appreciating how this single, egg-shaped structure can be the absolute linchpin for everything, from our simplest sensations to our most complex movements, our emotions, even our state of consciousness itself. It really shows how integrated the brain is.
It really does, and that leads to a fascinating final thought, doesn't it? If we can uncover this much complexity in the thalamus.
Well, what else might we uncover about other parts of the brain? Maybe structures we think we already know well? If we always approach them with this same level of deep inquiry. If something as seemingly fundamental as relaying sensation has all these intricate layers and loops and clinical implications within the thalamus, what other knowns might hold deeper secrets waiting to be understood?
A perfect thought to end on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the thalamus. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and we'll see you next time.